I've talked a lot of shit about carbohydrates in the past. Really, it almost seems like every single week. But it's finally culminating into a final sort of question regarding carbohydrates, which I think is important to actually consider and answer, which is, well, should carbohydrates even be considered a macronutrient? This is something that really I'm extemporaneously thinking about. I put it down as a topic to talk about, but I really am just going to think out loud here. I mean, at the end of the day, we absolutely know that carbohydrates, exogenous carbohydrates, aren't required for human consumption. Above a certain physiological concentration in the bloodstream, they induce harm. We absolutely know this. We create all of the glucose we require through gluconeogenesis, and our efficiency for gluconeogenesis is that of hypercarnivores. The reason we even talk about the efficiency is because the mere existence of gluconeogenesis is not sufficient, logically speaking, to assert that exogenous carbohydrates aren't required. Other animals, like even hummingbirds that primarily derive their food in the form of simple carbohydrates and have postprandial blood sugar levels that are 42 millimoles per liter, actually. At least that's the highest recorded, which translates to about 756 milligrams per deciliter, and yet have HbA1c values lower than that of non-diabetic humans. But they have gluconeogenesis as well because every single organism faces the threat of starvation, and they also all sleep. So that's not sufficient. But when you look at our efficiency for gluconeogenesis, our ability to recycle carbohydrates for use, when you observe human beings becoming fat adapted, and you look at what substrates are actually being tapped into to create glucose, it turns out that it's very minimal muscle once fully fat adapted. When you're not fully fat adapted, that is sort of reduced. You actually do use quite a little bit more muscle. It seems, at least in the people studied, the population studied, then it becomes very clear that carbohydrates are not required, exogenously speaking. They're not required for exogenous administration into the human organism. And so really that leaves us with a question. Why is it considered a macronutrient? I mean, macro means big, yeah, right? So we're not talking about micronutrients like selenium and magnesium. We're talking about the major ones like protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Well, protein is required. Fat is required, but carbohydrates aren't. So carbohydrates fit the macro part, but do they fit the nutrient part? And then this brings us to an interesting discussion. I mean, let's just look up. You're seeing me extemporaneously think about these issues live. It's not like I've rehearsed this. I mean, what is the definition of nutrient? A substance that provides nourishment essential for growth and the maintenance of life. So essential for growth. Well, exogenous carbohydrates are not essential for growth, and they're also not essential for the maintenance of life. But again, on my channel, I try and be as forgiving as possible, which I know can come across as patronizing, but I mean, so be it. If I come across as patronizing, so be it. I'm just purveying the truth here. So let's cut off the end. Essential for growth and the maintenance of life. A substance that provides nourishment. Well, let's look up nourishment real quick. The food or other substances necessary for growth, health, and good condition. So not necessary for growth, not necessary for health. In fact, they could actually be counterproductive in that respect. And good condition. Well, define good condition. I mean, that's quite vague. So not one part of the definition of nutrient is appropriate to apply to carbohydrates. Now, there's an interesting discussion to be had surrounding the argument that just because something isn't required doesn't mean that it can't provide benefit. Now, that logic, that argument in isolation is a substantial argument. It's a valid argument. Okay, we obviously know things. For example, Cerule products. Well, they're not required for human consumption and the, maintenance of life, growth, and health and good condition, obviously. But I believe that given the fact that we're in a modern world and we're plagued by a bunch of contraindicated, by now, link in the description below, externalities surrounding us, I think that we can use a nutraceutical to help us in that respect, which is why I personally take Stem Enhance Ultra every single day, and I believe that it helps me. Of course, in an ideal world, you wouldn't take any of those because you wouldn't have to, but we live in a fallen world in many respects. So, of course, you can make the argument that because carbohydrates aren't required, of course, they can provide a benefit. Now, there's an argument to be had there. However, the evidence surrounding that claim is quite minimal, at least at the moment. I would be completely willing to accept that carbohydrates can be used strategically in certain situations, primarily during situations that aren't exactly congruous with what our genes withstood historically, through our to a genotypic adaptation or adaptive degree. For example, if you're engaging in extremely intense exercise, then perhaps a glucose gel, which ostensibly from things that I've heard, I haven't actually looked at the literature or analyzed it directly myself, it seems like only a few grams is even required in the first place. In this context, it seems like, yeah, maybe a glucose gel could help. But for 99% of circumstances, it's not indicated at all. I made a video about this earlier, how the principles of indication, whether something is indicated or not, is dependent on the circumstances. Anesthesia right now would not be indicated in my circumstances, the administration of it into my body. But of course, if I'm undergoing a surgery, then I would want that. So in some cases, some people have Xanax during a surgery, if they actually can't go under. Of course, there may be an indication there. But in the case of carbohydrates, of course, it would be that rule would also be applicable. There might be 1% of circumstances where you could have it. I know that Dr. John Jaquish, many people may recognize that name. He is the founder and inventor, really, of the X3 bar, which I'm actually a huge fan of, especially as someone with EDS, hypermobile EDS specifically. He will actually only consume carbohydrates whenever he's about to do a photo shoot because it makes him more vascular and it inflates his muscles because it repletes the glycogen stores in full. And so go ahead. I mean, if you're going to do that once every 6 months or so and you're not someone that has a proclivity towards addiction, then if you're going to use it tactically, then go ahead. I think it's very important to reduce the amount of circumstances that you are in that would cause glucose to be indicated, because most of them, if you're engaging, for example, in extremely intense exercise, well, why are you doing that? What are the benefits? Weigh the pros and cons out according to your goals, your specific goals as a human being. Because if it's only for vanity, well, there's an argument that maybe you shouldn't be doing that unless that's your career. And then in which case you could make an argument that you should be doing it. But even then, do you really want to be building a career based on harming yourself in the long term and even in the short term, just for vanity? It's an argument to be had. It's debatable. But at the end of the day, how I opened this was, should carbohydrates be considered a macronutrient? I've talked enough shit. Let's actually get to the point, which is, okay, are they even really able to be called a macronutrient? Well, in human beings, no. Absolutely not, based on the definitions that we have. Now, of course, there's also an argument to make. Well, definitions are based on a consensus panel. Definitions are opinions. However, we have to have some sort of instantiated framework to work with when it comes to language communication, because if we don't, then everything is chaotic and dangerous. So if we're going with the operational definitions that are chosen here, that have been chosen, well, no, they're not nourishment and they're not nutrients. They are macro, of course, in the sense that protein and fat is a macronutrient, but they are not nutrients. So, and you can't really shorten it and call them macros because that's a shortened version of macronutrient. So it's implicit when you say macro that it is a macronutrient. So what should you call it? Well, you should check out the video that I just released a few weeks ago entitled, Yes, Sugar is a Drug, because that is what it is. It is a drug. You want to talk about definitions? Let's look up the definition of drug. Drug, a medicine or other substance which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. Which is a very vague definition, by the way. If you look at the sub-definition here, a substance taken for its narcotic or stimulant effects, typically illegally. Of course, sugar wouldn't be considered that much. However, this raises a question as to whether legality of an action or situation is reflective of morality in the case of behavioral actions and or indication. See, this is all philosophical, isn't it? So there's a lot of nuance behind this topic. I'm not someone to just reflexively, just immediately jump to, oh yes, blank is contraindicated just because I said so, because I want it to be, because it fits my ideology. I don't really have an ideology that is particularly chosen based on prejudices or anything like that, and preconceived notions that may or may not be true. I have an ideology that is arrived at by truthful or through truthful and objective methods. Wherever the truth guides me is where I ought to be. So anyway, you should be the same way, my dear viewer. So check out that video if you haven't already, because frankly, I think it's incredibly important for people to hear that perspective. Because carbohydrates, exogenous carbohydrates, they as much as there are many other contraindications that actually may very well be worse than carbohydrate consumption, like seed oils, for example. As much as they may be present, it doesn't exonerate carbohydrate consumption from being a culprit in the health epidemic that we are seeing today. Carbohydrates are required, and I did a video on this too. How are they required? Well, I did a video on that. I get deep into the physiology. Yes, it's required, but exogenous carbohydrates are not, and not only are they not required, but above a certain physiological concentration in the bloodstream, as I alluded to in the beginning, are absolutely toxic. Demonstrated patently by the existence of type 2 diabetes, or diabetes in general, really, which is a disease characterized exclusively and explicitly as chronically elevated blood glucose, nothing else. So, with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it insightful, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? I see you. You know I see you. And also, once again, as I alluded to earlier, buy my book Contrainidicated, a closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. If you have not bought that book already, all 4 formats are available now. If you are on Google Play Books, at the moment of recording, it is not out yet, unfortunately. It is out on Kobo, Barnes & Noble, and Kindle, and also Apple Books. So if you have all those, purchase that if you haven't already. And if you are on Google Play, I'm sorry, your patience will still be rewarded, but just not as quickly, I guess. And also, as I also alluded to earlier, the link at the bottom of the screen. What is that link? Well, that is a link that will bring you to an amazing site with amazing products from an amazing brand known as Cerule. If you purchase product through that link, you will get a permanent percentage discount and permanent free shipping when signing up for monthly deliveries. And if you email me behind the scenes at edgoki@pm.me, I can tell you how to earn those products for free, because who in their right mind wouldn't want that? But of course, I would never recommend purchasing any product without critically analyzing it and looking into what the products even are in the first place. So, fortunately for you, I have a video linked in the top right corner of the screen, which is a complete video elucidation and explanation of what those products are, who should take them, why you should take them, when to take them, etc., etc. And I'd also further migrate to the description below to find a video I did on these products in further detail, as well as the company of Cerule itself, which I think is incredibly important if you're willing to actually contribute towards them. Oh, I don't know who Cerule is. What are they? Where am I giving my money to? Well, that video explains it in depth. So, with that being said, join me next time when we are talking about sugar again and how you shouldn't be consuming it, I guess. Or we're talking about how inane it is to say that you need glucose for insulin secretion if you are a human being. So all across the board, irrespective of genotype and phenotype, which I've never said, by the way, ever. I've said it depends on your genotype and phenotype. And it's also a theory that isn't substantiated. So anyway, I'm rambling on long enough. Till then,